Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for the Nonprofit Leadership Series. I don't know about you, but I can't think of a better way to spend a Friday afternoon. I need party music or something, looking outside and seeing the sunshine. And I hope you've got a drink. Mine's coffee, but here you go. We're going to get started. I just want to say, I think we have a record number of alumni on this call today. So welcome everyone, welcome alumni. And I know we're all looking forward to speaking with and meeting Mike Farwell today. So I just wanted to start by saying, and we'll talk a little bit about it in more detail, but we are here for Mike for Farwell for Hire. And guess what? We've hired him. So we're very excited to have this opportunity. So Leadership Waterloo Region has made a donation to Farwell for Hire to thank Mike for today. And Bethan and I are each kicking in $1 for every registrant. So we have 60 registrants. So we're going to be putting in between her and I an additional $120 today. So we can put that into the fund. So we will make sure you have the opportunity to know how you can also make a donation to Farwell for Hire. And if you're looking for a number, 60 is a good one, but anything you can give would be fantastic. So I'm just going to start today with some housekeeping items. So we're going to ask that you keep your mic or your audio on mute. There will be opportunity perhaps at the end for questions and answers, but we will unmute you for that. You can choose your view, which is speaker versus gallery, top right-hand corner. I love gallery. I want to see everyone and what's going on. Feel free to keep your cameras on. You're amongst friends, and what a great way to start a weekend. There will be time for Q&A, and we have the chat screen at the bottom. Bethan and I will both be monitoring that to make sure that we get to the questions. So questions that aren't answered throughout the presentation, we'll make sure we get to. And we also have the information that you filled in at registration, so we'll be monitoring that as well. Make sure you stick around to the end. I always say that's the best part of the sandwich is the last bite, and that is when all those questions will get answered. We are recording this session. So again, if you choose to have your camera off for that, that's your own choice. And again, evaluations. So in response to COVID, Leadership Waterloo Region said, what can we do to help our nonprofits through this? So we launched a nonprofit leadership series. This is a free series where we've offered support and training in different areas that our community is really looking for help in. Now, these areas and these recommendations for sessions have come from our nonprofit community. So we're asking, please fill in your evaluation. Tell us how we're doing. Are we hitting the mark? And is there anything else you would like to see a talk on? So I'm going to turn it over to Bethan now to speak to our convening principles and then on to our guests.
Thanks, Diane. So Leadership Waterloo Region, like many organizations, had to, and I hate to use this word because it's an overused term these days, pivot pretty quickly to be able to continue to provide our programming. So it was really important for us to pull together some virtual convening principles to guide how we would approach this unusual situation. So first up is nobody signed up for this. Not for sickness, not for physical distancing, and not for the additional stresses that have been added to our lives. We haven't asked for having to switch to convening virtually, and not for participating at home, and not for mastering new technologies. We agree that we will remain human-centered. So we're going to prioritize supporting each other as whole human beings, whatever that brings on and whatever life brings us. And we're going to prioritize sharing resources and communicating clearly, because when working at a distance, communication is often the first thing that breaks down. So we make that commitment to communicate open and clearly with ourselves and with you guys. The third one is we can and will continue our mission virtually. So Leadership Waterloo Region is an organization that's based on shared personal in-person experiences, and these are no longer possible. But we commit to creating emotionally engaged virtual spaces, which I'm hoping you're going to be able to experience today. And the last one is we will remain flexible and adjust to the situation. So nobody knows where this is going and for how long. We really will need to adapt. You know, wave 2 might be coming. We don't know what that looks like. And so everybody really needs to support and understand each other in these unprecedented times. And in times of crisis, we've agreed that we will lean on our strengths-based leadership of trust, compassion, stability, and hope. So these are just, it's a document that we put together, like I said, that overviews how we plan on moving forward during this time. And if anyone is interested in getting that document, there's some additional points under each heading. And I'm happy to share that with anyone who would find that of value, either personally or in their profession. So just drop me a note in the chat and I can, I'll tag down your name and send that out to you. So I'll turn it back over to Diane now to introduce our very special facilitator, Mike.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Bethan. I just feel so lucky that I'm the one. I have the honor of introducing to you today, Mike Farwell. I know many of you know Mike for many different things in the community, but Mike brings us today both experience and knowledge with media, particularly local media, but also a lot of depth and knowledge about our community. Currently, Mike is the host of the very popular Mike Farwell Show. I hope you listen in every morning on 570 News. And I'm sure that many of you in your nonprofits have had the opportunity to tell your stories on Mike's show. And for that, we're very grateful. You will also, your hockey fans, you know, we are Canadian. Many of you also know Mike as the voice of the Rangers for many years. In February, Mike was awarded with the Records Barn Raising Award. Now, this prestigious award was established in 2008, and it's given to honor and highlight an individual or organization in the community who are selfless, dedicated, and through their actions make us better. Does this not describe Mike? Mike, you've served on numerous boards, committees. How many of you have been to an event where Mike has emceed? Just a fantastic job. Again, thank you for providing the space and confidence for our not-for-profits to tell their stories. You're an amazing advocate, a human, and the kind of person that gets things done. So in 2014, I guess Mike sent a text out for Farwell for Hire, offering to, I don't know, wash your car, weed your garden, mow your lawn. And all of this was in exchange for a donation to cystic fibrosis. 6 years later, and nearly $500,000 later for cystic fibrosis, Mike continues to do this every May. Now, given that so many agencies in our community are struggling this year, Mike has opened that up to help not only cystic fibrosis, but many of the frontline agencies that are facing and dealing with our community. So I'm going to make sure you know how to give to this later, but until then, I'll turn it over to Mike. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Diane and Bethan, for this opportunity to be here and do this today. I have to be honest with you, I'm a little bit nervous. Actually, I'm a lot nervous because this is not the way I usually do things online like this. So I'm much more comfortable being in a room and seeing you in person and all of your smiling faces. However, and I would like to, by the way, ask that I get the opportunity to do this in person at some point down the road. So if I can do that at some point and get the opportunity to be with all of you in person, I would absolutely love to do that. So you'll have to bear with me too on the technology part of this, but I'm going to do my best right now and see. Bethan, I'm going to count on you to let me know how I'm doing here. But if we get this into presentation mode, am I off to an okay start? Can we see the title page of my presentation?
You're doing fabulous, Mike.
Thank you so much. Okay, and thank you once again to both Diane and Bethan for allowing me the opportunity to do this and for their generosity, because Bethan used that word that so many of us have been using during COVID-19, and that is pivot. So Diane already explained a little bit of Farwell for hire and how it's usually gone. And this year it's turned a little bit different for me as physical distancing requirements and a few of the other regulations have really changed the way I usually go about doing my fundraising. So this is a terrific opportunity to not only raise a little bit of money thanks to the generosity of Leadership Waterloo Region and Diane and Bethan, but also to still participate and do things within our community and get a chance to interact with you, even if it is virtually. So please do bear with me as we go through this. Hopefully from a technical standpoint, I can manage this, and we will absolutely give you the opportunity towards the end to have any questions answered. Hopefully I can answer some of them along the way as we go through this. And one of the other things I'm going to miss about being in a room with you is I often pick somebody near the back of the room because that's where I always found myself sitting when I was in school. And I picked that person in the back to tell me when I'm starting to talk too much or I'm going off on too much of a tangent, because as a talk show host, I guess it's supposed to come naturally, the talking and going on at some length at times. And I want to make sure I stay on track here and get the information to you that I know that you're all looking for today, or certainly I hope so. And some of the questions that you had asked ahead of time are interesting. I think there could be different streams of a presentation like this in terms of how we use social media effectively and what makes for compelling stories. But I think that's what I really want to focus on. And that is this word stories. Diane and Bethan have both used it already. And I think we're already there now, particularly across the nonprofit sector. I don't think, and it's the right approach. I don't think we look at things anymore as just sending out a news release and hoping that somebody will talk about our quote unquote news release. We talk about sharing stories. And that's really what I want to emphasize here, because I know for certain that each of you has a story to share. So it's just a matter of how we craft that story, maybe how we deliver that story to our friends in the media to make sure that the story then can be shared with a wider audience. So that's why we are calling this what we are, and that is making sure that your stories, don't let them be your best kept secret, because there are great stories to share, and I know each of you has one of those stories. So if we begin at the beginning, because it's always a very good place to begin, do you have that story that will interest the media? And I'm sure that's a question that you ask yourself. What constitutes a story? What will the media want to talk about? What will interest them and by extension their audiences? So you have to start by asking yourself that question too. Would your story be of any interest to the public or any other group beyond your own organization? So in simplest terms, in this case, I have no doubt that you're doing terrific work within your organization, and lots of things happen to you and your organization on a daily basis, just like it is for the rest of us in our places of work. But things that happen internally are not necessarily going to be of great interest beyond your organization. If you've done a reorg, if you've reorganized your board, if you're looking for a board member, those sorts of things are not necessarily going to have broad appeal beyond your own organization. And I suspect you know that. If there's a new executive director coming in, if there's a new CEO coming in, if there's a new chairperson of the board coming in, those things carry a little bit more weight than a little bit of internal restructuring or something like that. So keep that in mind, and I'll share with you what we talk about in media all the time. And I think you could use this as sort of a starting point for what might be more interesting beyond the walls of your organization. When we are in media arranging or organizing a newscast for the day, our lead story, the first story you hear on your newscast, is what we have determined internally to our, in my case, radio station, but it's the same at TV, it's the same in a newspaper. What's going on the front page is what we have internally determined to matter the most to the greatest number of people. So when you're thinking about stories that may be of interest to the media, and by extension, the audience of those various media, ask yourself that question. How many people will this interest beyond my own organization? What matters the most to the greatest number of people? And if we use that as a starting point and as a launching pad, then off we go to trying to encourage the media to pick up that story and share it with their audiences. So a couple of things that make it easy right off the bat: money and star power. So money is pretty simple. Are you getting a large contribution from a government, for example? Is there going to be an injection of tens of thousands, or in a great world, hundreds of thousands of dollars to your organization? Funding announcements tend to resonate because we all like to hear about how our money is being granted out by governments or whatever the case may be. So if there is money involved, if there are dollar signs attached to it, that tends to have greater impact on the media to whom you are pitching. Star power is the same thing. If you have a high profile guest speaker coming to talk at a gala event that you're going to be holding, they're going to be doing a lunch and learn session. Somebody like I'm thinking of popular names these days, like a Chris Hadfield would be an example. Maybe you've got Wayne Gretzky coming to your organization. Maybe it's former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. Whatever the case may be, if there is some cachet attached to a name that will be doing anything at all for your organization, it might be attached to a fundraiser, it might just be attached in some way to something that's happening within your organization. Those types of connections to what you're doing tend to draw out the media because, quite frankly, if there's a big name involved, it draws eyeballs to a newscast, the pictures in the newspaper, and ears to a radio station. So that is another, those are two really easy ways to have something that would generate interest with the media. If there are dollar signs attached to it, or if there is a big name that is coming to support your organization in some way. Another way to really ensure that there will be more interest in the media that you're pitching is to try, when you're making that pitch, to make it personal. And by that, I mean, get to know the person to whom you are making the pitch of your story. We have at the radio station, and I know that every other media outlet has the same, what I would call a generic email inbox that can be used, which in the earliest days, at the very beginning, if that's the only connection you have to a given media organization, that's fine. But the more you can do to find out the best person to address that media release to, the better. Because then you have, even if you have not yet met that person in the flesh, and who knows when we're going to be able to do that again, if you have not yet met that person face to face, at least you know that you are directing your story to the right individual. And you can attach a name to the media release or the story that you're sending out. Now, this can be a really easy thing to accomplish. It can be as simple as a phone call and asking the question, to whom should I direct my news release? Who's the best person to direct a news release about X, Y, or Z? Is it a funding announcement? Is it a fundraiser that's coming up? Is it a community event? Whatever it is, you can ask the question who the best person is, and then somebody on the other end of that phone, I promise you, will tell you, and all of a sudden, you've got that contact. It really can be that simple, and it does go a long way. If you don't take that step and you end up going through the generic email box, I know internally at our radio station, for example, that generic box is shared pretty widely, but somebody, if they do have interest in your story, will personally email you back. If that happens, then you have that contact as well, and don't be afraid to use it. I remember one of my favorite shows when I was growing up was, shockingly, about a radio station. And it was called WKRP in Cincinnati. For old people like me in the crowd, I hope you enjoy that one. But Dr. Johnny Fever, the main DJ in that show, was playing a song one day called "How Can I Miss You If You Won't Go Away?" And I've never forgotten the name of that, because I think it applies to exactly what we're talking about right here. Don't be afraid. I should put that another way. It's pretty hard to be a pest. Yes, we get an awful lot of requests, but the only way we know about you and that your organization exists and that it's doing great things is by being reminded that it's there. So always remember that. How can we miss you if you won't go away? Don't let us miss you. Make sure that we know that you're there, that you are doing the great work that you've always done in our community. And don't be afraid of leaving it up to us to decide, okay, this is a story we're interested enough in sharing with our audience. Maybe the next one's not, maybe the next one's not, but the one after that might be. And I recognize every time I say story, you think of another story that you have to craft. There is work on your end. I get it. But what I want to emphasize is I don't want you to be too concerned with being too much of a pest. Sometimes with all of the information that we are sifting through on a daily basis, it's just seeing the name of the organization. Oh, there's Leadership Waterloo Region up to something. It sits there in our mind. I would think back to, I remember very well, a conversation I had, or I was trying to have electronically with former Kitchener City Councillor Frank Etherington. And I wanted to attribute a quote to him in a piece I was writing for the Kitchener Post. And we were going back and forth in email. And all I wanted to do, like, he had already given me the quote, but I wanted him to know it was going to appear in the paper. And when he got back to me, I was actually past deadline and I had already submitted it. But he said, Mike, no problem, just don't spell my name wrong. And there are a number, the real crafty and savvy politicians recognize that the more their name is in the media, the better. Especially if, of course, if it's for good things. But if you hear the name Frank Etherington, or you hear the name Tom Galloway, or you hear the name Dave Jaworski, it just kind of, it stays in the forefront of your mind. So that's where I come back to the how can we miss you if you won't go away. If we know what it is that your organization is up to, even if we're not picking up the stories every single time, it's good for us to know. And I would recommend that maybe it become part of your overall media relations strategy. It's like a check-in. Here's a story you might be interested in. You might not be, but we're going to let you know that Leadership Waterloo Region, or Lutherwood, or the Food Bank, or Habitat for Humanity, doing these things, it's out there, and it keeps it in the forefront of our minds. Given the amount of information that we are dealing with on a daily basis, and I'm not trying to ask you to have a pity party for me here, however, there is a lot, particularly with that generic inbox, because I can tell you there are public relations agencies that some organizations or individuals have hired out, and they will, I guarantee you, they've got little robots that can go out and cull every single email address that could possibly pick up a story. And they just do e-blasts all the time. So we really are sifting through dozens and dozens every single day. When it comes to how you are crafting your story, how you are pitching the story, I would more often than not stick with the less is more idea. If you can keep this to one page, get the key points of your story across and pique our interest enough that we're going to follow through on that, that would be my recommendation. There would be circumstances, by all means. I'm not saying it's a hard and fast rule, but there are times where if it's too much, we might just glance right past it because we don't have time to take in that much information at the time. And that can go from a one-page pitch to a media organization right down to a media advisory. An advisory can just be the who, the what, the where, right? And the when. So Friday, May 22nd, that's where we are, right? Yeah, Friday, May 22nd, 1:30, Leadership Waterloo Region, special guest, Commander Chris Hadfield to speak about whatever it is. And it can be that short, and off you go, and that would pique the interest, and you get the coverage that you so crave. So if you can keep it to a page, sometimes even less, all the better. What things can you do to improve your chances of having your media release picked up or your story shared? One of the things, and I admit it can be a little bit on the gimmicky side, but this goes back as far as 2004. And I remember it so well. The Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council began the Say Hi campaign. And it was either the second or third year of the campaign. I can't quite remember which it was, but They delivered, along with their launch of the campaign and their media release, a Say Hi pie. Maybe it's my sweet tooth that makes it stand out. I don't know. I also like how it rhymes. Say Hi pie. But it was something that came with the news release.
Well, it seems we're having a little bit of technical difficulties on Mike's end, a little bit frozen. So we'll just use our patience. I'm sure he'll be back at any second. And I hope you're all taking notes. I have a ton of notes I'm taking today. So just hang in there and he should be right back. The joys of working from home.
We're back. I'm so sorry. I saw this spinning wheel on my screen and I was terrified of it. Absolutely terrified.
You're amongst friends, Mike. We all get it. We're working from home.
Okay.
So thank you for that.
Now I have to share my screen again, don't I?
Yes.
You have my screen? We're okay?
I don't see the screen just yet.
You'll have to reshare, Mike.
Okay. Here we go. Share screen. Okay. Back, we're good? Awesome. This is where we left off, right? Improving the chances of having your story picked up by the media.
And we were waiting to hear the pie story.
Oh, excellent. Another opportunity to tell about Say Hi pie. So it's probably got a lot to do with my sweet tooth, I'll admit, and the fact that there's a little bit of rhyming involved. It rolls off the tongue, right? Say Hi pie. But the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council started the Say Hi campaign, and this goes back well over a decade at this point. But in launching it after it was their second or third year of the campaign, but they, along with their media package, that said the Say Hi campaign has started again. Make sure you're saying hi. You've got your little button. They delivered a pie. They called it Say Hi pie. Now, I recognize that what you're talking about when something like this happens is an added layer of complexity to what it is you're trying to do. There's an added cost. It's not for everybody. And it can at times backfire. And I had started telling the Krispy Kreme story when I realized I had been cut off. But you can make something memorable by attaching something like that. I remember another campaign, and this one was Hockey Helps the Homeless, which is much more recent. And they give you a little foam puck that stays with you. I've got one still on my desk at the radio station, and it's always there to remind me that, oh, Hockey Helps the Homeless is an ongoing initiative in our community. So things like that can add a little bit to what it is you're trying to do, especially if it's a recurring campaign. And that kind of ties into the second bullet, which I'll get to in a second. There are limitations. You want to make sure that not every story pitch comes with a little gimmick like that. Krispy Kreme, the donut maker, was famous for getting free advertising or trying to get free advertising, because what they would do, and this was a designed, what we would call guerrilla marketing campaign across North America. Every time they opened a new store, what did they do? They sent donuts by the dozens to every media outlet in the city that they just opened. Why? Because when food shows up at a radio station or a TV station, the people within that station get pretty excited about it. And the next thing you know, you're eating a Krispy Kreme donut and you're talking about it on the air. It became, we got wise to it pretty quick. You know, you can fool us a couple of times, but then you're not going to get to us through our stomachs. And we actually got a notification from our managers that said, next time Krispy Kreme donuts show up, don't say a word about them. In fact, Krispy Kreme ruined it for everybody else, because it is very rare now, unless it's a pre-organized campaign, to get any of those quote unquote free plugs just by sending something to the radio or TV station. So there can be limits on that. I also remember famously Glenn Crowder. He was a longtime spokesperson and PR person for Woodbine Racetrack. And we always loved it. When I was working at Sportsnet 590, The Fan in Toronto, we loved the days that Glenn wanted to show up and talk about what's happening at the racetrack, because he always brought with him a tray of sandwiches every time. And there's nothing you want more at 7:30 in the morning when he shows up at the radio station than a ham and cheese sandwich. It was pretty great. We loved it. And it made Glenn pretty memorable too. He was always getting the quote unquote advertising anyway, because Woodbine Racetrack was a good partner of the radio station. But we certainly appreciated the sandwich trays that came with every one of his appearances. And in talking about that, remember that really that is what you're looking for. Advertising can sound like a bit of a dirty word when we're talking about sharing your stories, but really that's what you're getting, right? You're being afforded the opportunity to have the name of your organization or the cause that you're working for stated multiple times throughout the course of a newscast or within a story in the newspaper. So it does draw attention to your organization. That's what you're trying to do with all of this. So in a sense, you can look at it as that quote unquote free advertising. Earned media might be the more technical term for it internally. So when I talk about being a builder, I'm talking about that idea of building a campaign, much like the Say Hi campaign, which ran year over year for several years as part of the Waterloo Region Crime Prevention Council. Random Acts of Kindness becomes another example that comes to mind for me. So if you're building, it gives you the opportunity to build a brand. Your organization can get the opportunity to become known for a signature idea or a signature event. Now, that's not something that is going to be, that's not something that's going to happen just because you sent out a media release and had a story to share. This would be something that you would be working on to launch, and then you have an action plan for carrying it through. But building a brand so that your organization gets associated with X event, X cause, whatever the case may be, can be really effective, because then we just get accustomed to it, and we know that down the road it's going to happen again. And when it does, oh yeah, that's the Leadership Waterloo Region Leadership Series. Here it comes again, and it's time for it. Things like Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest would obviously stand alone or stand apart in examples like that. But the opportunity exists for you to build your own brand over years of a successful campaign. It doesn't happen overnight, and that probably makes it sound a lot easier than it actually is, but those opportunities really do exist for you. One of the other keys, and I touched on this earlier, in getting your story picked up is trying to avoid, as I said, trying to avoid that generic email inbox. It can be as simple as picking up the phone and calling to find out to whom your story should be directed, but then you've got that personal touch, and it matters. Now, having said that, it's also important that you know the audience of who it is that you're trying to reach. I got, and I mentioned earlier, I think before we got disconnected for a second, that there are these public relations agencies that seemingly find every single email address of everybody that might be in charge of sifting through stories, and they just bombard them. And I can tell now just by the generic content that, even though it starts with "Hi Mike," I can tell right away that it's just a generic, what I would call spam pitch, because they've somehow come across my email address. I guess I don't hide it, so that's probably part of the reason. But that personal touch really matters. However, I would encourage you to be careful when using it. I understand that time is critical to everybody, and you've got a lot on your plate. I got this not 3 weeks ago, this fantastic pitch. It was a compelling story. It was long, it was via email, and it was about a business owner that was really having a hard time due to COVID-19, and his story was interesting to me. It was an angle I hadn't heard. I was hooked. I'm like, this is really interesting. I can see how this would be interesting to my audience. And then in the last paragraph, or maybe the second to last, it said, I think this is a story that might be of interest to your readers. Now, again, I get it. This was something that was obviously sent to a variety of media outlets, and it was copied and pasted. But that one sticks with me, because now I know, as good as your pitch was, you weren't pitching it just to me. And I guess there's a part of us in media that wants to think that you want to share your story on our platform because you think our platform is the best. Obviously, the problem with that is I don't have any readers. I have listeners, sometimes viewers, because the show gets simulcast. And in truth, the story was so compelling, and I think I'm over the earliest days of ego in this business that my platform has to be the only platform. I called them anyway because the story was that good. But it's a little thing. It's a nice thing. If you're going to pitch, hey, Mike, here's a great story I want to share, make sure, if you're doing the copy and paste, that when it comes to me, it says listeners. Again, it's a little thing, but it's a nice thing. This next bit on having your story picked up by media and then shared with their audiences might be the most important piece in all of this, because really, if you can avoid certain times of the day or times of the week, you might be amazed at how much stuff gets picked up. And I'm going to share with you another little secret at the end of this particular portion. But we have this thing in media called the Friday afternoon news dump. You might have heard about it. If you haven't, let me tell you why we call it that and why it's done that way. The Friday afternoon news dump, and we had one, it was pre-COVID. It wasn't that long ago. But I wish I should have made a note of what the story was. The bottom line is, it's a story that is deliberately sent out, usually by a government, at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. And the reason that it's done that way is because they know full well that media we're just like everybody else, right? We have shifts, we have weekends, and we look forward to quitting time on a Friday afternoon. So if you send out a news release or you make a major announcement on Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, you're doing that so that it doesn't get picked up by the media, and it's not the lead story on every Saturday morning newspaper and anything like that. It's done on purpose, and quite frankly, it ticks us off a little bit. That's why we call it the Friday afternoon news dump. So if you want to improve your chances of having a story pitch picked up, avoid Friday afternoons in the late afternoon, because you're going to have people that are mentally maybe checked out. They might have plans to go out with their friends after work that night, whatever the case may be. Fatigue is a real thing in the news cycle too. Reporters are just like anybody else, and they will be ready to check out of the office for the week late on a Friday afternoon. So if you can avoid Friday afternoons in general, not necessarily for the timing of an event, but certainly for letting us know about your event, you're going to have a far greater opportunity to have that picked up. So that makes the flip side true in all of this. Monday mornings, Tuesdays, that sort of thing, probably one of the best times, because again, in a typical workspace or in a typical media workspace, we are away by and large. The full-timers are away for the weekend, so things will slow down in the news cycle. And then when Monday comes, we're going to be checking back in and looking for stories to share that particular week, or maybe even right out of the gates on Monday as soon as we can. So I would suggest to you that a Monday or a Tuesday earlier in the week is one of the better opportunities for you to have your story pitch picked up by the media. Let me take you inside, and I would recommend this on your end as well. Let me take you inside any radio station, TV station I've ever worked at. I've never worked at a newspaper, but I would suspect they're exactly the same. We have these things that are called day files. So, for example, let's say that Leadership Waterloo Region sent us a media advisory that Commander Chris Hadfield was going to be here for this funding announcement at this time and this day, and it's a couple of weeks down the road. If it's, well, I'm thinking back to the old days of paper and stuff, but anyway, it would get filed away so that we know that on Friday, May the 22nd, this is going to be happening, and we keep that file on hand. So when the day comes and we're sending out assignments after our morning meetings, boom, this reporter's covering this reporter's covering that. You can do the same thing with how and when you want to share your information. And you can do that by doing a little bit of planning around other big events in the news cycle. For example, I can tell you off the top of my head that October the 11th, 2019 was a terrible day to try to get your story picked up by the media. Why? Because that was the first day of Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest last year. And you know, in this community where all eyes are on the day that the keg gets tapped, right? So you would want to be aware of that when you're planning whatever it is that you want to have picked up. The year before, in 2018, I can tell you off the top of my head that a terrible day to have your story pitch picked up was June the 7th of 2018. Why? Because that was the day of the provincial election. I suspect that these things are understood already, but keep it in mind. If you're sending out this pitch and you're wondering, why can't my story get picked up? Well, maybe it's because you didn't separate it enough from other items in the news cycle. Some of them are going to be obvious. Look, nobody could ever have predicted. I remember vividly March the 11th. That, for me, was the day that COVID-19 started, because I was finishing a broadcast of a Kitchener Rangers game in Guelph. And that was the night that the NBA pressed pause on its season and the Maple Syrup Festival canceled for the year. I was finishing my broadcast in Guelph. On the way to the game that day, listening to the radio, the World Health Organization declared COVID-19 a global pandemic, so things were starting to get real. And hours later, I'm finishing a broadcast, the NBA is on pause, the Elmira Maple Syrup Festival is canceled, and all of a sudden, everything changed. Obviously, you can't predict something like that. But things that are in the news cycle that you know about coming, keg tapping is always very well advertised, things like that, try to stay away from them. This is the part that I make sure that everybody is still paying attention. And it gives us, is anybody going to name that tune yet? You don't have to shout it out at once, but I can see you kind of bopping along. We call these pattern disruptors in broadcasting. It's something that jars you awake from the dull, monotonous tone of my voice. But it also, along with taking us back to our youth, right? And who can't bop along with this song? There's a method to my madness, because you know what this song keeps saying, right? Here it comes again. Here's the key. In this case, I don't want you to call Ghostbusters. I want to be able to call you. I want to talk to you. So, and believe you me, I trust that you know this already, and this is part of your usual workflow. But if you are sending a story pitch, please, I implore you, provide the contact information, and not only that, ensure that when we contact you, because often we will, when we contact you, you are available to speak to us. We can be selfish in this regard. We do work to deadlines, and sometimes it might be a story pitch that we got on a Tuesday, and on Thursday afternoon, we've decided this is the time that we're going to tell the story. And oh my, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and our story has to be on the air for 6. And I'm probably describing worst case, but I'm not going to lie to you that we're perfect. And we do sometimes procrastinate. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to get a hold of Diane Wiles. If I don't get a hold of Diane today, I'm not going to have my story on the air by 6. And I know that's putting pressure on you. I understand that. I do. You can't be there at our beck and call. However, one of the most frustrating things that we encounter, and sadly we still do encounter it, is getting this story pitch that is of interest to us, and we'll reach out on it and we won't get a response. Again, I'm not asking you to be at our beck and call. However, do expect, if you've pitched a story, to be contacted about the story. It reminds me of the little inside nugget I promised to share earlier and I didn't. I think you would be surprised at the number of stories and the kinds of stories that are being picked up by media today. We like so many other industries, have gone through a transformation. And I'm really drawing back the curtain for you a little bit here. But we don't have the experience in our newsrooms that we once did. So as our younger reporters build that experience, they are looking for help with stories. So if your story compels them and it comes across their desk so they don't have to go and find one on their own. I used to work for a news director. Her name was Mary, and she scared me. She scared me so much, but she was good. She was really good at what she did. And I had to, it was part of my job when I was a reporter. I had to come into work every day. My shift was 10 till 6. I had to come into work every day with at least 3 story ideas. That's what I had to do. And honest to goodness, I would sometimes panic because I'm walking to work. Oh my gosh, do I have 3 stories yet today? And I always remember walking into a Tim Hortons on my way to work, and there was a sign on the door saying that they were going to be closed in the overnight hours. And I thought, boy, why are they going to close between midnight and 6 and only offer drive-through? And it turns out, to go back to the aforementioned Oktoberfest, they had a few festers in the previous night that had caused a bit of a ruckus because they'd been festing a little too much, and it made it a little bit uncomfortable for the staff inside that particular Tim Hortons. And all of a sudden, just because I read that sign on the door and thought to ask a question about it, I had a great story to take into work with me. Thank goodness I survived the pitch. That's a bit of a story associated with the idea, though, that those sorts of things have kind of fallen by the wayside a little bit in news media. And so when one of our younger junior reporters comes in to work, they're looking for a story, and it might be yours. So give them the opportunity to reach out to you. I think you'd be really surprised at the kinds of stories that are being, and I'm not trying to downplay the importance of your stories. People are looking. We have lots of young people. They're trying to get experience in telling the stories, and then they'll get the opportunity to get to know you. And all of a sudden, which we're going to talk about in a bit, that relationship has been built. So again, this all started with the importance that it's critically important that you provide contact information. We might not call you that day. More often than not, you're going to hear from us within 24 hours. But just because you don't, that doesn't mean the story won't get picked up. So one of my other favorite sayings is your Department of Redundancy department. Have somebody else that can either, if they can't speak to the release or the story pitch that you've made, make sure that there is somebody that we can reach that can then reach you, right? Have that redundancy built in to your system so that if it's 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning and we're making the reach, but we can't get you because you made your pitch the previous Wednesday, we can get to somebody that can help us get to you and then help you share your story. Okay, I want to talk now because we're getting to the point that you're going to be interviewed, right? And hopefully
Mike,
this is going to work. Yes.
Just before you click the link, you need
Yeah.
to just adjust your volume, the computer settings again for your sharing your volume, because the
Oh, right.
Ghostbusters theme song didn't come through.
Oh gosh, I wasn't sharing my computer audio. Okay. I was
Don't
all
worry,
bopping away for it.
I still sang along in my head, so it's all
Thank you.
good.
Okay, where do I have to go to do that? Hang on. Oh, this is going to be me on my technology again. Am I in the right place? It's over here.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Just bear with us, folks.
Oh, my screen sharing got paused. Okay.
That's okay.
I can't remember where to go for this, Beth, and I'm so sorry.
I think it's
Oh,
under
wait, here it
view
is.
options.
There you go.
Share computer sound. Okay. And now go back to my resume share. Bring you back in here. Oh, you are such patient people, and I appreciate you so much. Really? Okay, so we're seeing me again, or we're seeing my screen.
You're
Okay.
good.
Now, hopefully this works. It's coming.
Okay, can I go and see my two sons I haven't seen in 10 weeks? Can I go and see them today and maintain 2-meter distance? Yes or no?
As far as I would be concerned, I do not speak for the government. As long as you maintain social distancing in what you do,
Okay.
that will not allow
This is the problem, Andrew Bridgen. You see, what you've just said is completely against the new rules, as stated. So there you are, a Conservative member of Parliament who thinks you know exactly what Boris Johnson has been saying, and yet you've just told me to do something I'm not allowed to do. So this is the problem, isn't it? There is no clarity. It's a load of old flannel talking about controlling the virus, and you, as a leading, high-profile Conservative politician, haven't got a clue about what these rules actually mean. And you're an MP. You're part of this.
Piers, I did hear your diatribe against the Prime Minister earlier on. What you've got to
When you
remember...
say diatribe, let me explain what my diatribe is. We have, according to the government's own graphs, and you can spin them any way you like, the second worst death toll in the world, and that's just the deaths that we're declaring at 31,000. The real figure, according to any detailed analysis of the ONS figures, is over 55,000 people. It's an absolute national disgrace when you compare it to almost any other country in the world. We've had no testing. Our Deputy Chief Medical Officer said we didn't need testing, it wasn't appropriate, so we stopped doing it, which was a total scandal. We've had no PPE for the NHS frontline workers and care home workers, which is why over 200 of them have died. It's an absolute national disgrace. And when you come on and say, I heard your diatribe against Boris Johnson, the diatribe is because so many people have died, and so many people are continuing to die.
Okay, so raise your hands if you don't want to be the person that just got interviewed by Piers Morgan, right? And the frustrating part is the fellow who shared this on Twitter says it's a masterclass in the questions all journalists should be asking. It's just my personal opinion, but Piers is a bit of a jackwagon, and not all journalists. Quite frankly, that wasn't an interview so much as Piers doing a little bit of grandstanding. However, it's stuff like that which tends to get a lot of attention on social media and elsewhere, and gets elevated to the status of quote unquote good, hard-nosed journalism. Nobody wants to be that MP, right? I promise you that experiences like you just witnessed are rare. That might make up 2%, 5 at the most, of all interview experiences. And I will remind you that the stories you would like to share are going to be positive stories. If you are in a position whereby you have defrauded the community, embezzled money, run your organization into the ground, you got a whole other set of problems than talking to me. And I can put you in touch with people that are very good at crisis communications and recovery, okay? But other than that, please don't let experiences like the one just had by that particular MP dissuade you from your conversations with, as opposed to interviews, but your conversations with the media. I understand that it can be intimidating. I get it, especially when the microphones and the cameras come out, if that's the case. Completely understood. And with practice comes improvement. You'll get more comfortable. You'll get better at doing it. So this is all to speak to the first point. As much as you may be dreading having to do that interview, put on a happy face as best you can. I will never forget, and still haven't forgotten, an interview I was doing with a band. So I guess a morning interview, because it was on a morning show that I was doing. Might not have been their cup of tea. They might have been up late doing what musicians do. Who knows? But I kid you not, I asked the first question, and the first thing I heard was a yawn. Oh yeah, man. And that's how it started. And I cannot imagine a worse interview. And in fact, I would never interview them again. I thought, we're giving you a platform on our radio station, and that's what, 8:20 in the morning is a little bit too early for you. Tisk. So again, it's not all going to be Piers Morgan. It's not all going to be take your other pick of a quote unquote investigative journalist. It's going to be an opportunity for you to share your story. And trust me, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And as I tell people often, it'll be way less painful than a trip to the dentist. One of the things that you can do to help you through these interviews is make a list. You can even write it down, especially if it's not going to be a televised interview. If it's going to be something with a newspaper or a radio reporter, have the key messages that you want to make sure that you share during the course of that interview. And come back to them, repeat them if necessary. That's fine. For you then, you're taking utmost advantage of your opportunity to be interviewed. So have those key messages in mind. Don't be afraid to jot them down in point form as you're having that interview, and make sure you hammer them home during the course of the interview, which if you get 10 minutes, you're lucky. And if it's going to be turned into a news story, only selected quotes will be taken from it, right? Little clips for the radio, little clips for the TV, little quotes in the newspaper out of your whole 10-minute interview. So you would like to hope that at least one of those quotes is one of your key messages. So make sure you've got them handy and you deliver them even repeatedly if necessary. Probably goes without saying, but avoiding the use of anything that's inside to your industry, right? I've shared a few stories here. In fact, I just said the word clips, didn't I? That's an internal jargon for our industry. That means the sound of your voice in one of our news reports. It's called a clip, or technically we call it an actuality. You don't need to know that. Nobody needs to know that. So when you're talking to us about your organization, any acronyms, any jargon that's specific to your industry that very few, if any others, are going to understand, then try to keep it out. Dumb it down. Trust me, we're not the brightest folk out there. Dumb it down. A friend of mine always used to say, talk to me like you're talking to a fifth grader. Perfect. Deliver the message that way. And this last one, it should really go without saying, but I'm going to say it, and it's really important. Honestly, answer the question that's been asked of you. I know you want to deliver your key messages, and I want you to deliver your key messages, but start with the answer to the question that was actually asked, even if it's a short answer to the question. Could be yes, depending on the question that's asked, but please answer the question and then spin it back into the story that you want to tell and the messages that you want to deliver. So as I just talked about, not everybody's going to be a Piers Morgan. Believe you me, going back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago about the number of people we have in our newsrooms today, but the number of people who are really new to the industry, right? We have, oh, I'm missing the word right now, but we have aged out in a lot of ways, and we're getting younger and younger people in who are learning as they go, and they are anxious to share your stories. They really are. When possible, beyond just an email, pick up the phone and give a call into our newsroom. And if you've learned the name of the person that might be reporting on the story, or you're listening, you can do some homework, right? When you're reading the newspaper, when you're watching the evening news, when you're listening to one of our newscasts, you might get the sense of the person that tends to cover the kinds of stories that you want to share. Fantastic. So all of a sudden you're calling up and saying, I'd like to talk to Mike Farwell. Can I chat with Farwell? And that just begins the creation of that relationship. In a perfect world, and I'm not sure we have this opportunity as much as we once did, but it always mattered to me to have the opportunity to sit down for a coffee. And when I was working that 10 to 6 shift, for example, if it was 8 or 8:30 in the morning, let's meet for a coffee before you go to work and before I go to work, so that we can get to know each other on a human level, it really does go a long way. Again, in the COVID world, and who knows what we look like post-pandemic, who knows what that looks like. And I know we're all so busy and our time is so valuable. But if there is time for that conversation over a cup of coffee, I would highly recommend it, because those in-person meetings matter. It just builds the relationship, right? It helps us get to know you, and it helps you get to know us and realize that we're not all the Pierce Morgans of the world. So maybe in your openness in all of this, we could have that coffee at your office. It might give us an opportunity to see your shop. What does it look like? What do you do, and how do you do it? I'm thinking of a food bank example where you've got the warehouse of all of the food that's sorted in this way or that way. Here's the volunteers. Here's our office area, the people that do this. Oh, if you get a news release from us, this is the person that sends it, things like that. Open up your place of work to us to give us a better understanding, a firsthand understanding. And we really value that sort of thing. And in return, we can turn that around and have you into our radio station to show you what it's like on our side. The egos in all of us would love to think that you're actually interested. Wow, what's it like inside the radio station? Don't ever be afraid to ask. Even if you're doing it just to gain that foothold, we're more than happy to give you at least the nickel tour most days. So in all of this, I want to make sure that you know, and I recognized a few of the names that were on this call today. I'm here, and I really do. One of my favorite areas. Some of my favorite stories have been stories I've been able to tell about our nonprofit sector, because I know over the years they haven't kicked me out of the newsroom yet, so I'm still kicking around. There are great stories to be shared from so many of our nonprofit organizations. This is my contact info. If you don't have it already, please do not be afraid to use it anytime. Feel free. Reach out via email, give me a call, whatever the case may be, and we can talk one-on-one about ways that we can share or help to share your stories. But I'm more than happy to do that at any time. And I left this slide like this deliberately because Bethan told me I'm supposed to put in my shameless plug right here. You can see that. It says so right on the screen, because that's the kind of direction that she gave me. Look, I am so grateful, as I have been for so many years, to this community and all of the support I've had for this goofy fundraising campaign. It started with a single tweet back on April the 30th. I remember because I was sitting at the Citizen of the Year dinner. I didn't pay. Media people don't pay for stuff. The station bought a table. And it was April 30th, and I just had this idea in my mind how I might be able to change up my fundraising strategy. And the idea was, okay, for every donation I get, I'll provide a service: mowing lawns, weeding gardens, washing cars, whatever it happens to be. And the uptake from that first year and that single tweet has turned into so many great stories, so many great relationships. And it only works because of where we live. I'm convinced of that. But it does happen every May. This year, because of the pivot that Bethan talked about before, it's going to be May and June, because who knows what I'm going to be able to do publicly over the next many weeks. So we're going to extend it a little bit longer and see what we can do to support organizations in our community and raise as much money as we can. We figure we have the platform and people kind of expect it at this time of year. So we're doing the best that we can. And that's all I got to say. I think I've talked plenty for you. So why don't I try this stop share thing and turn it back over, because I did promise time for questions, and there is time for that if I haven't talked your ears off already.
Well, Mike, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for all those nuggets of wisdom, reminding us, it's all about relationships, and we need to be prepared. I know the media is very bombarded. So let's build those relationships and come forward with great information. So we had a couple of questions that came through earlier. If anybody has a couple of questions now, they can come through on the chat. But is there any relationship between free advertising, free coverage, and paid messaging?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. And I will admit that the lines have blurred over the years. So certainly the short answer would be yes. And that is not to say, please don't misunderstand, that is not to say that you must buy advertising on a radio or TV station or within a newspaper to get coverage. However, in the world that we now live in, particularly on our radio station, so I'm speaking specifically about us, but clients who buy advertising are often offered the opportunity to do a segment on the air somewhere. So that's a little bit of a value add that's given to them. It's something that we're careful with, but that line has absolutely been blurred over time. But again, I want to emphasize, you don't have to buy an advertising campaign in order to get coverage on the radio station. That's not the way it works. Those are still church and state.
Excellent. So I have another question here. Is it better to have one key media person or to have multiple people have relationships with the media?
Absolutely one key media person. And look, we all have turnover within our organizations, but it's funny. I was just seeing on Facebook the other day, the fellow that used to be our key media contact at Grand River Hospital. And I think he was moving to a new job. I think he's 2 jobs since Grand River Hospital, but I don't report as much anymore now that I've moved on to other roles. But it's just interesting how I really got to know him in his role as the key communications and media person for Grand River Hospital. And that is invaluable to us. I've actually caught myself a couple of times, because I'm old now. I remember people from certain roles and they bounce around, go somewhere else. So that's going to happen within your organization. But
Yes.
Absolutely, if you've got that one key person that we can get to know and that who can get to know us, that means a ton. It really does.
Fantastic. And I have a question here in the chat. What happens when a clip is used out of context? How would you suggest we approach the media outlet or reporter, or should we even go there?
Yeah, you should. You absolutely should, because it is our responsibility to ensure that what we are doing is fair and accurate. And I can tell you, certainly from my personal perspective and from the perspective of everybody that we have working with us and that I have sometimes had a hand in training, we drill this sort of thing home. It is truly our intent. It's never our intention to embarrass someone or mistell their story. So if we do that, we absolutely need to be called on it. I would start by speaking directly to the reporter that with whom you have the issue. And if that doesn't bear fruit, we all have supervisors. And if you have to elevate it to that, you do. But by all means, if you've been misquoted or taken out of context in some way, make sure we know about it. Make sure we know about it.
Excellent. And that's where the relationships are so important.
Yeah.
So important. Just one last question. How much time do you wait before you follow up if you haven't had a response? And what's the best way to do that follow-up?
That's a really good question. I'm going to say 48. Nobody, as I said earlier, how can we miss you if you won't go away? Even 24 hours probably wouldn't be out of the question. But if you send something on a Monday, wouldn't hurt to check in on the Wednesday morning. If you want to check in on Tuesday afternoon, whatever. So 24 hours is fine. And I think that a follow-up phone call is better than just a follow-up email, because again, I'm a little bit old school. Email still seems more impersonal to me, but no matter which way you choose, if you're more comfortable on email, that's fine. Fire off another email. Again, going back to what I said, unless your story is time sensitive. So if you've got an event happening or a guest speaker coming, or funding is going to be announced and you want to know how many media are going to be in attendance, by all means, we sense that urgency too. If your story is what we call undated, and I'll share the quick example. I recently had one from the House of Friendship that told a great story about a gentleman who is working with them now, who used to be somebody that they served. And his name was Sean. And his story blew me away. And we were, in fact, I reached out to the House of Friendship to say, I want to talk to Sean. I want to tell Sean's story if he's willing to come on the air and share it. And in fact, we were just in the process of setting that up before COVID hit, and we haven't even had the chance to tell his story yet. But the point is, Sean's story would be what we call undated, right? There's no timeline, there's no celebrity guest, there's no funding announcement, but it's a compelling story that we want to share. But it might take us 2 weeks even to come around to it, but nothing wrong with you in that time kind of nudging us to say, hey, did you get it? Are you interested in the story?
Fantastic. Well, on that note, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your time today, Mike. I know you said insert shameless plug here, but I've been fundraising almost 30 years, and I have no problem telling people that I think this is a fantastic cause, and please consider giving to Farwell for Hire. When I think we could play 6 degrees of separation with you, Mike. So we could get to you, I think, because you're so well known in this community, and for you to be able to use your public face and your connections to do so much good for cystic fibrosis, which is a charity close to my heart, as well as for our community. I just want to say thank you.
You are so welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really want to see all of you in person someday. So remember this, if there's ever an opportunity to do this in a room together, I would welcome it.
Fantastic. And we will take you up on that. We love our speaker series. We just, a couple of more things for follow-up. We are recruiting for Leadership Waterloo Region, class of 2021. So we are going forward with our affordable housing project in partnership with Wellbeing Waterloo Region and the University of Waterloo's Waterloo Institute for Social Innovation and Resilience. So this pilot year has just been fantastic. So we're having an information session on Zoom Tuesday, May 26th at noon. Come meet some of our current class members, alumni, and facilitators, and it's going to be a fantastic year. So I invite you to come to that. And as well, we have one more session booked in the free nonprofit leadership series. And we're going to be welcoming next Friday, Stephen Shedletsky, who's head of brand experience and igniter. Why can't I say that? Anyways, he's with Simon Sinek. Bethan and I have attended Stephen's trainings. He is fantastic and knows his stuff. So it's based on leading in infinite times, Simon's new book, and there is some pre-reading that will go out. The more you put into it, the more you'll get out of this session, and it is free. And we have had a donor come forward and buy an extended Zoom license for us, so we can hold up to 500 people. So we were offering this session to our corporate friends as well for supporting Leadership Waterloo Region, and a way to say thank you to the community. So stay tuned for more of these free sessions that will be happening throughout June. Any questions, follow up for Bethan and I? It's been a real pleasure. All of the notes and follow up will come through email, as well as invitations to next sessions. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.